Well, welcome back to the Christ Centered Life. And on this episode, we are quickly approaching a very special day as Americans, and that is our 250th birthday as a
Happy
nation.
birthday, America.
Happy birthday, America.
250. I mean, you don't look a day over 100,
Thanks.
America.
That's right. So, in this episode, we want to think through the question, is America a Christian nation? We hear that all the time. America's a Christian nation. America was founded on Christian principles. And so we just really want to look into, what do people mean when they say that? And is it true? Are we really a Christian nation?
Yeah, and I want to start with the question of, why does it even matter? I mean, it obviously matters, but what are some reasons for you personally? What are some reasons that it matters whether or not we were founded as a Christian nation? Because you might be, for instance, you and I could be citizens of some nation that clearly didn't have any Christian influences early in its founding. That wouldn't change the fact that we are Christians, that we're pursuing a relationship with Christ. So why does it matter one way or the other?
It matters for me because if it was founded on Christianity or Christian beliefs or by Christian people, then those were the people who shaped our laws. Those were the people who shaped our government. Those were the people who created the system of government that has led to what we have now. And if their intent was for our government and our nation to be that would be at least God-honoring and at least reflective of biblical ideas, then that's going to really impact me and my family. Our laws are going to be such that reflect the laws of God. And that's important to me, because if we don't recognize God as the source of everything and the one who has created and designed this world and the one who has ordered and given law to us, if we don't recognize that, then it creates a really big problem of, well, who does get to decide what's right, what's wrong, and what repercussions happen when a wrong has been done. And so to me, it is a very valuable thing to live in a country that at least at some level has recognized the Judeo-Christian worldview and the laws given by God, and that even recognizing that there is a God, that there is a creator, and that we answer to him. All those things matter because they're going to trickle down into the way that we live our lives, the way that we are able to function through being citizens of this nation. What about you?
I think there's a couple of reasons, and you hit kind of on one of these. One is just the opportunity and ability and freedom to recognize God in government settings and to really speak openly, not just about God, but about scriptural principles and the Bible, the gospel, to have Scripture be a part of. Although I recognize that we can't just put the Bible down and say, okay, the Bible is now the way that we rule our nation. There are several reasons we can't do that. One being, we are not Old Testament Israel living under the Old Covenant. But so there's even some theological reasons. But of course, there are political reasons, and there are, we recognize that the entire United States is not a nation of Christians that recognize the authority of God's Word. We get that. But just to be able to bring it into the conversation, this is something that we ought to consider. So kind of that recognition in the public square that this Christian principles, Christian ideas, Christian theology have a very important voice in what we do as a culture. And that idea is fading very quickly. I think the second reason is that most Americans, I believe, have this sense, right or wrong about this, they have this sense that we did a pretty good thing. And I say we, our ancestors did a pretty good thing, our forefathers, as we call them. They did a pretty good thing with this whole Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, this experiment in ordered liberty and self-government, that it was a pretty good thing. So we have a sense that if we can recover what it is that guided them, then we will have a good guide for the next 250 years. And so I think the argument over kind of what got us here, was it Christian principles or was it rationalism? Was it some other worldview that kind of drove us to where we have gotten over the last 250 years? Is a really important question to me in what is going to drive us for the next 250 years.
Yeah.
So I think it's I think people intuitively know it's an important question, but it's interesting to step back and ask, why does it really matter?
Right. And you see people, politicians and even just citizens constantly wanting to claim, their group or their party was the one that got it right, and you see that. And so it matters because everybody wants to be able to say, this is something good that we've done, right? We're a part of something good.
That's important,
And that's important. So
another reason as well, which I think is really crucial, is I see an intent or an attempt, I should say, an attempt to live off of what I believe are Christian principles that rose up from the Western Christian world, out of a Christian worldview, a biblical worldview that we really like. And I believe that that's where those principles came from. And if you remove the foundation of that by saying, well, those were never really Christian principles, that's really not what this is, then you remove the foundation. And I see a lot of people, and many people have admitted this. There's been some pretty famous public cases where some atheists have said, yeah, we like Christian culture. We would choose Christian culture. And so the most famous atheist, the one that's an atheist apologist of sorts, his name has skipped my mind. I can't believe I've forgotten his name. I'll remember it in a moment. But he's actually said, hey, actually I do go to church every once in a while, and I like the Christian culture because I see what it does for culture overall. Well, you can't have that. You can't hold on to that and then rip the foundation out.
Right.
So we've really got to go back and look at what was the foundation. And if we get that answer to that question wrong, then we're not going to be able to hold on to the principles that we all love so much.
All right. So that's why it matters, just in our opinion. Now let's think about, what does it mean? So what does it mean when somebody says America is a Christian nation, or ask the question, is America a Christian nation? What do people mean by that?
I think people mean a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I believe that's where the confusion comes in for most people. Now, there are some people, no matter how you frame this question, they're going to adamantly answer, no, America is not a Christian nation. My opinion, it's just because they really don't want the answer to be yes.
Right.
But maybe I'm wrong about that. So there's a couple of different ways you can think about this question. One would be, was America established as some kind of theocracy where we would say the principles of Christianity are encoded into laws, and if it's not a Christian law or a Christian principle, then we're not going to operate by it, and we're going to make sure that kind of Christianity rules the day, and maybe even the priests would serve as the judge or something like that. Not the priests, but the pastors, or in some cases priests, would serve as judges and that kind of thing, and the church would kind of oversee law. That would be one way. That would be like a theocracy. Is America a Christian nation? Obviously, in that way, no, America is not a Christian nation. Another way you could ask the question would be more like the Holy Roman Empire.
Right.
And there was that political entity that was set up very much that way. But another way would be like many of the European states. It's kind of interesting because we see the church dying off in Europe at a really fast rate, but most of those nations, or many of them, actually have in their constitutions some kind of statement about being a Christian nation. Mm. So, you just think first of England and the United Kingdom. And when Prince Charles became King Charles, the ceremony was so interesting because he was taking over as the head of the church, not only as the ceremonial head of the state. He's not the head of government, but he's the head of state. They have a distinction in their system over that. But he's the head of state. He's also the head of the church. I mean, he's the top dog of the Church of England, and that is the official church of the United Kingdom. So in that way, is the United States a Christian nation, or was it ever? No. We never chose an official church state. We don't, for instance, pay the salaries of clergy as many European nations do. So that would be another way to look at that.
I think another way to look at it is asking the question, are most Americans Christians?
Right.
in that respect, I also think no, we are not a Christian nation in the fact that, we have 300 and something million American citizens, and I don't think that
No.
that the majority of those people are Christians. Now, a lot of them might be professing to go to church.
Most of them, some of them might claim a Christian identity. Like if you just were to ask them, you might get a decent number of people to say, yes, that's kind of our identity. But I don't know that there has ever been a time where we're talking about true born-again Christians, where the majority of Americans have been truly born again. Mm-hmm. There have been times where the majority of Americans have participated in church services, civil religion, that kind of thing. But interestingly enough, I've seen some recent research that even during colonial times, most people didn't actually go to church on a Sunday morning. That on any given Sunday morning, they would not be sitting in church. Mm-hmm. That changed with the Great Awakening. Mm-hmm. The Great Awakening really changed the religious landscape of the colonies, and many, many more people started going to church. And then, of course, there was the Second Great Awakening. There have been times, and then there was kind of the post-World War II kind of time where I think the majority of Americans probably were sitting in a church on Sunday morning, or at least had some identity with a church. So there have been times when a lot of people have gone to church. We certainly wouldn't say today that America is made up mostly of Christians.
Right.
And I don't know that if that's ever been true.
Yeah.
So that is another way to look at it.
Yeah. And then the other way to look at it is, was America founded by Christian principles?
Yes.
And if so, who were the people that founded that, and why would they do that?
Let me say there's one more way we could think of this question before we get to that one.
Okay.
It would be, does America currently operate according to a Christian worldview? Mm. So you would say, well, a Christian nation is going to operate according to a Christian worldview. I think we're in a real struggle over that right now, but I think in so many ways the obvious answer to that question is no, we don't operate by a Christian worldview. So even though there would be, those who don't go to church or don't have any kind of religious affiliation, you could see that the overall influence of the Christian worldview might hold sway over the culture. I think that's probably the culture that you and I grew up in some ways, where most people generally operated according to Christian principles. In other words, if the Bible said something was wrong, then most people probably thought it was wrong, and if the Bible said something was good, most people weren't against the church. They saw the church as kind of a good thing, a positive thing for culture, and those things have changed drastically.
They have.
So, but the question that you ask, was America founded on and with Christian principles? Now, that's the really interesting question. And for those who might just totally disagree with our answer to this, is America a Christian nation? I want to make sure that they understand that's what I think some Christians don't think about the question, but those that do, this is generally what they mean. Mm-hmm. They don't mean that we're mostly a Christian nation, that in other words, that most people in America are Christians, or even that we always do the Christian thing, or that our laws all reflect Christian principles. I don't know of any Christians who think those things are true. I think most Christians who say America is a Christian nation, what we mean when we say that is that America was founded on principles that were so closely related to the Christian worldview that it's just almost impossible to separate the two, that's the worldview that gave birth to not only the United States of America, but the entire Western experience and the Western worldview, and that those principles, those are what have given us the great liberty that we've enjoyed for the last 250 years.
Yeah. And so when we look at that, we see Western civilization is greatly under attack. There are a lot of people who wish to erase the fact that Western civilization is a unique thing in and of itself, and wish for it not to be anymore. And so as Christians, we see that, and we see that is an attack against biblical worldview, because so much of Western civilization and the uniqueness of it came from a biblical worldview, and so and biblical principles. And so we do see that happening right now.
it would be an interesting podcast to talk about, as non-historians, which we are, to talk about the Western worldview and how it came to be, and maybe help people who really aren't that much into history and philosophy and that kind of thing kind of understand where the Western worldview came from. But yeah, that's what we mean. And certainly Christianity obviously did not start in Europe.
Right.
But Christianity took root in Europe. And after Christianity was really not snuffed out completely, but after it was minimized mainly by Muslim conquest, Christianity found its home in Europe. And then Christianity, the Christian principles and the Christian worldview found their home there. And so when we talk about the Western worldview, we're very much talking about a Christian worldview. Doesn't mean they always did the right thing or they always did what Jesus would do or anything like that, but those principles that were guiding them. And I would say just kind of like we have a lot of fun over on, I'd say our side of the political aisle, where we very much are against communism, socialism, anything like that. And so when we see people who are really, just pounding away at those principles, and then you find out that they have an enormous amount of wealth. So obviously they believe those things or they say those things, but they don't actually live those things out.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that socialism or communism isn't a coherent set of principles. It just means that those particular people don't actually believe those principles.
Right.
And so the same is true in Christianity. If you're on the more on the anti-Christian side of things, and you say, well, it's clear that Christianity is no good because obviously those principles were never lived out. Well, that doesn't mean the principles themselves are not good.
Right.
And I think that has a big application to the answer to this question. Is America a Christian nation? Was it founded on Christian principles? Because many times people will point to the people themselves and they will say, look, Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. Therefore, this nation could not have been founded on Christian principles. Mm-hmm. Well, just because he didn't personally live out those principles doesn't mean that they aren't the principles that influenced him in helping write the Declaration of Independence, for instance.
Yeah. All right. So do you feel like we've adequately talked about what does it mean?
I think so. Yeah, I think we've got what we're saying or what we're asking is, was America, the United States of America, founded on principles that arose out of a Christian worldview?
Mm-hmm. So, was it?
I think absolutely unequivocally yes. I don't know that there's any other way you can see America coming to be, the United States of America coming to be. And because in many ways, what we were doing was we were extending the Western experiment that had started in so much of Europe and then kind of, I think, found its pinnacle so far, maybe there's a better one, but found its pinnacle here in the United States, unencumbered by some of the issues that those European nations had gotten trapped in. The framers of the Constitution, the founding fathers, they were able to look at this kind of in a blank slate way and say, well, if we were starting from scratch, what would this look like? And they were able to produce these incredible guiding documents, guiding principles. And then how would we know? How would we know if these men were driven by these principles? Well, we would have to. The only thing we can do is look at what they said.
Yeah.
And and then look at what they've written down and what they passed down to us.
Yeah. So I have a few quotes that I can share from a few of our founding fathers, and then we could talk a little more about that. So the first one is George Washington's farewell address. This was in 1796. He said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens.
I think some of the language there, first, to be clear, when he says religion,
he's not talking about all the religions of the world.
No, he's not. He's talking about Christianity.
Right.
And especially the way that people would use the word religion or different religions in, say, the 18th century when he's speaking, is the way we would use the word denominations today. And so when he says, if someone talks about different religions, They're saying, a Baptist versus a Presbyterian. They're not talking about a Christian versus a Muslim.
Right.
So when George Washington says religion, he's speaking about the Christian religion. And notice what he says there about them being pillars.
Yeah.
So religion and morality, these two pillars, first of all, you can't separate the two.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have religion, you don't have morality. And the only way to get morality is for there to be a good base of religion. And then notice that he says that they're pillars. Right. That if you remove these things, the whole house comes tumbling down because they're holding up and supporting everything that we believe.
Right. And I see that. I see that so much that if we don't have a reason to, a person of authority and a reason to say these things are right and good and true and these things are not, if we don't have that, then at any moment, the things that are right and good and true can change. And then again, they can change. And so that is chaos. That is madness. All right, the John Adams letter to the Massachusetts militia in 1798, he said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other."
So again, in John Adams' mind, John Adams says this experiment that we have, this Constitution that we've put together, it only works for there are those two words again, moral and religious people.
Right.
So, and again, when he says religion, he's not talking about Islam. He's not talking about Hinduism. He's talking about the Christian religion.
Right.
And so a moral and religious people, that's what is required. That's what this, and we see this, right? Because there is you and I talk about this all the time, drives me crazy. It's the small things. When you go to Walmart and someone who is not handicapped parks in a handicapped spot and says, "What are you going to do?"
Right.
Well, sure, we can get tow trucks out there and tow them, but honestly, we're not going to take the time and investment. We're depending on basically moral people to say it's not right for me to park in a handicapped parking spot.
Yeah.
Even business requires this. So the whole free enterprise system that we have, if the majority of people, it wouldn't even take a majority. I would say it would take maybe 30%. If 30% of people said, "I'm going to steal everything I can get away with stealing," we're done.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing that. We
are.
seen that in some of our, states that have decided to just let them walk out the door. If it's under a certain amount of money, just let them walk out the door. And those states have skyrocketed their taxes and all the. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't afford to live in those places.
And the
because of that.
businesses shutter up and leave.
They do.
And of course, we know people who work at businesses who are trained in that way.
Yeah.
Just don't stop the shoplifters.
Right.
And there are reasons that they do that, and they have their reasons. The companies do, and in many ways, you can't fault them for those reasons. So morality and religion were absolutely foundational to the ideas in the thinking of the minds of these founding fathers.
Yeah.
This was required for us to maintain our Constitution.
Yeah. John Adams said, "This is not going to work if the group of people don't respect God as an authority and respect what he has said to be right and true." He also, in his letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1813, said the general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the only principles in which that beautiful assembly of young gentlemen could unite. And what were these general principles? I answer, the general principles of Christianity.
So here he not only says religion, he takes it a step further and says Christianity. That letter, I would encourage you, it's a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson in 1813. This is many years after the Revolution, obviously. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are both nearing the end of their life at this point. This is a really important letter. You should go read the entire letter, because in the letter he says, actually, the group of people that fought for this, so the coalition that we put together, you had among them, and he names off several different ideas, even atheists. He says there were even atheists among us, several different religions, several different worldviews, again, even atheism. And he says, but there was only one set of principles that could have united us all to actually fight together. And those principles that we used to unite everyone together to agree upon are the general principles of Christianity. That's, and who are we here 250 years later to say what the founding fathers were thinking. I think John Adams has a really good idea of what the founding fathers were thinking.
Yeah.
He was there. He was in all those rooms. He was in all those discussions, all those debates.
The room where it happened?
He was in the room where it happened. So he would have a good idea.
Yeah. All right. And then Noah Webster, in The History of the United States, 1832, it says, the Christian religion is the basis, or rather the source, of all genuine freedom in government. I am persuaded that no civil government of a republican form can exist and be durable in which the principles of Christianity have not been a controlling influence.
So again, Noah Webster, we have him to thank for our dictionary. I really love that Noah Webster put a dictionary together because he didn't want American English to be British English. So he said,
we will be unique.
We will write our own dictionary. So if you ever wonder why we spell savior differently or flavor or any of those words, that's Noah Webster. He said, you know what, we're going to have our own way. Thank you very much. It's a very American thing to do. But Noah Webster says these are the only principles, the ideas of Christianity are the only ones that can sustain a government like ours. It's the only way that it will work. Now, something we didn't read, and I would encourage listeners and viewers to explore. We're going to look at the Declaration of Independence in just a moment, but the constitutions of the colonies. So there were 13 colonies that went together to make the United States, to declare independence as united colonies. When you look at the constitutions and the guiding documents of those colonies, they are explicitly Christian documents. Mm-hmm. And so when you start to see how the people were thinking and how the people who were making it happen, who were moving things ahead, what were they thinking? They were directly guided by Christian principles. So that's another great place to look. But we want to look at our own Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, and so the Declaration of Independence, I love because you think about the amount of people it took to make this happen and their dedication to get it right. And they were very careful about every single word, mm-hmm. right? They were intentional about the way that they worded it, and no doubt, many revisions and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into forming that document and preserving that document. So when you think about that, these words are not just words. These are ideas and truths and things that they wanted to be made very clear. So this is not just a K-Love song artist explaining how they came up with the lyrics of their song is what I'm
And I think really important, this is a good place to talk about this, I think, the people themselves. So I think that, let me tell you something that I think Christians can get wrong. We think of these men, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, we kind of like assume they would be sitting right next to us on our pew in our Southern Baptist churches, singing our hymns and amening our preachers. And that's not necessarily true. So that, not to say, I believe John Adams had a solidly Christian identity, and I believe George Washington had something of a Christian identity. Whether they were born-again Christians or not, we just really don't know. Thomas Jefferson was famously a deist, and there was the Thomas Jefferson Bible where he went through and cut out all the things that he felt like were probably not original or didn't really happen. And he made his own Bible. He said, this is a Bible I can live with. So this document that we're about to reference was written by Thomas Jefferson mainly. He was not the only author, but there were certain revisions and made by the and it was eventually a document of the Continental Congress itself. However, Thomas Jefferson's the main guy, and he is a deist. But a modern deist, a 21st century deist, is very different than a Thomas Jefferson deist. A modern deist is somebody who says, there's a God out there. Obviously, there's a higher power. How would creation exist if it weren't for that? But that's really about all we can know about him. That was not Thomas Jefferson. I think it's really important that the Jefferson Bible exists. He felt like he could take this document, this book called the Bible, that he could find truth in it. He just needed to take some parts out. Mm-hmm. Now, I totally disagree with him about that. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Jefferson would not be qualified to be a deacon at First Baptist Tillman's Corner. He wouldn't be qualified to be a member at First Baptist Tillman's Corner, by the way. And I pray that his interactions with other people eventually brought him to a place of true salvation. Only the Lord knows. But his form of deism, to take that and make it into some kind of modern form of deism is just not accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, he believed that he could find truth in Scripture, and that those principles of Scripture would actually guide him to a good place to put a document together like this.
Yeah. And, I think that not everybody goes so far as to cut the things out of their Bible, but every believer has struggled
Sure.
with things in the Bible that just don't line up with what you would make it say if you could write the Bible, and that's what it means to not be God, right? So that's also a big
So
part
I
of
want to,
that.
and some of them were devout Christians. Some of them were men who, if they were alive today, I'd love to have them preach in our pulpit. But we're not saying that these men were sold out followers of the Lord
Right.
Jesus Christ. We're just looking at, again, what they said, what they wrote, and then the documents that they produced, and saying these documents were relying heavily on Christian principles.
Right. And the value that they acknowledged in Christian principles in their founding of these documents. So in the Declaration of Independence, there are 4 references, allusions, direct quotes to or about God.
And why the Declaration of Independence versus the Constitution? There's no reference to God in the Constitution. But I think something that we need to recognize as a nation is we could and would still exist without our Constitution. We would not exist without the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence is our statement saying we're going to do a new thing. We're going to start a new nation.
And that's why July 4th is our birthday.
Absolutely.
Because that's the day it was
This
signed.
is when it was signed.
So-
So thus why we are celebrating 250 years after 1776 and not after 1789, I believe it was, whenever the Constitution was ratified.
Mm-hmm.
We were a nation with this document. When those men representing the colonies signed that document, our nation was born.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read the 4 things that were in reference to God in the Declaration of Independence. The first one is that the laws of God determine whether any nation has the right to exist.
Yes, it's in the opening paragraph. Thomas Jefferson and eventually the Continental Congress said, it is only God who can determine his laws and the laws of nature and of nature's God. Those laws are what determine whether a nation has a right to exist or not. Mm-hmm. So an ultimate appeal, that kind of the final court of decision, comes to the laws of God.
Yeah, and we see that, the Christ-centered worldview there. We see that in Scripture in multiple places where God is the one who sets the borders and boundaries. He's the one who establishes kings and leaders, and he's the one who knows all the nations and names them. So
if we lose that, so what if we lose that? That principle that came up out of a Christian worldview. If we lose that, what is our final appeal? Mm-hmm. So now we don't really have a final appeal. We just kind of had to sit around and take a straw poll.
Right.
What do y'all think?
Right.
And that's a really bad way to do things. And ultimately, even if we do have God's laws as the final appeal, we're going to argue about what those laws mean. Mm-hmm. But at least we have something we're arguing about, and not just your truth, my truth, everybody else's truth. Let's take a straw poll. Let's try to figure this out.
Right. The second one is the rights of all humans come from God.
This is the most famous statement about God in all of our founding documents. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. What does that mean? That means that we see them and they give evidence to themselves.
Yeah.
So these are what a philosopher would call properly basic, meaning there's no need to prove these. We all know these things are evident. Now think about, now you may disagree with this. You may say, well, those are not properly basic ideas. Those are not self-evident ideas. That's not the point. The point is the founders of our nation and the document that kicked this thing off says that. Mm-hmm. And so we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That's the principle that everyone wants to hold on to. Mm-hmm. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever group you're kind of promoting, you want to say, yes, all men are created equal. Yes, we hold on to that. Now, where does that come from? First, we've already had actually one reference to God that this could be considered 2 separate references. Created equal. Mm-hmm. All men are created equal. Creation requires a creator.
Yeah.
But then the next clause is going to give explicit reference to what is implied in that statement. So all men are created equal and are endowed. That means they're given by their Creator. So the Creator is giving something. Certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means that you cannot be separated from them.
Yeah.
So certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So much in that statement.
Yeah.
First of all, that there are some rights given to us by God, and these are three of them: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But that's just some of them. That's not all of them. It's a recognition that true human rights and human equality comes from God,
Yeah.
the Creator of all men.
It's a gift from God. It's not something given by men to men.
Yeah.
It's not something given by governments to men. It's something given by God to men.
The United States government does not give us our rights. The United States government properly recognizes our rights. And we might say the government of North Korea, for instance, it doesn't take away any of the rights of its people. It fails to recognize the rights that they have.
Yeah.
So no government, according to our Declaration of Independence, has the ability to give or take away rights. It can only recognize properly those rights that God has given, or it can try to deny the rights that God has given. And that's so important, because what if we lose this? All right, so if we lose the first reference, we have no final appeal. What if we lose this reference, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights? What if we lose that?
Then there's instant inequality, which means it's a big problem.
It's a massive
It's a big problem. And then who gets to decide who's the best and who's not the best? Who's really, when you look at it, it's not best and unbest. It's who is worthy of life and who is not worthy of life. That's really where you get to.
Who is worthy of life, who is worthy of liberty, and who is worthy of the pursuit of happiness, among many other rights. And I don't want that in the hands of any government. I want only a government trembling and fearful before God, determining how to best manage the rights that He has given. And I want us to recognize, and look, we're going to get it wrong. I mean, we certainly have gotten it wrong throughout our nation's history. But I want us to come back to that principle that we are pursuing rights that are given by God, not given by any government. And if we miss those rights and we deny rights to people, then we're denying rights that have been given to them by God.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
Well, the last two are appeals to God. So they appealed to God to judge the rightness of their cause.
And I think it's important to note that much of the Declaration of Independence is just a list of grievances. So there's some opening paragraphs, and in both of those opening paragraphs, there's a reference to God. There's an entire list of grievances against King George, saying, hey, you've not done this and you've not done that, or you have done this and you have done that. And then they come back to a couple of closing paragraphs, and in those closing paragraphs, they appeal to God. And so they say, first, we appeal to God as a judge. And so ultimately, God is going to have to decide whether we are right in this. And He will be the one to ultimately judge. So that's, again, a guiding principle. Just think about the guiding principles that are just in the Declaration of Independence. Well, we first start with God and His laws. Then we say that there are rights given to people that government has to recognize. Those come from God. Then we come down to, we will make our final appeal. Ultimately, God will be our judge. We will stand before God and we will give an account as to whether we correctly gave and managed these rights that God has given to humans.
And that takes such a sense of submission and humility that, again, really is cohesive with the Christian worldview of recognizing that no matter what we try to do here, we lay it at the feet of the Lord and say, you are the ultimate one in charge. You get to make the ultimate decisions, and nothing happens that doesn't flow through your hand and that you allow. And then they appealed to God for divine protection. Yeah,
they knew. You've heard it famously said by Ben Franklin after this, we either all hang together or we all hang separately. They knew they were either signing their letter of freedom or their death warrant. And so they said, look, we appeal to God for protection. We need God's divine intervention in order to help us overcome this difficult challenge that we got ahead of us.
And weren't there so many amazing stories of the Lord giving protection to those early Americans.
So, all right. So we've asked the question, do these principles arise out of a Christian worldview? And I mean, the answer to that question can only be yes. That doesn't mean, as we've said, that all Americans are Christians or that there's ever been a time where even a majority of Americans were truly followers of Christ. It doesn't mean that we've always lived out Christian principles. It doesn't mean that we don't have some massive black eyes on our record. But it does mean that in the beginning of this experiment, that it was Christian principles that arose out of a Christian worldview that helped us put together this thing that we call the United States of America. So, back to where we started, like, why is this important? If we're going to continue to enjoy the blessings, the liberty, the prosperity, yes, I mean, we're thankful for the prosperity, but there's so much more than that. Just the blessings of liberty, the freedom, the human rights, the liberty that we have enjoyed for 250 years and that we've been able to spread to many other places. If we're going to continue those things, it will only be by holding fast to the principles of the Christian worldview. If we toss that to the side, we will lose that which has been entrusted to us by our forefathers. So this is very important, and I want to encourage even those who just totally disagree with us. I mean, let us know. Oh, by the way, there's one document I want to bring up. So this is kind of for those who say America's not a Christian nation. This is the open and shut evidence, open and shut case that they make, and it's the Treaty of Tripoli. I'd never heard of it till probably 20 years ago. Somebody brought it up to me. It's not a really super important document in American history, but it is a really important document in this whole conversation. Most of us don't know anything about Tripoli other than it's in the song. You
Right.
know? Well, one of the early issues we had was with pirates, and they were in the Mediterranean, kind of over as you get close to Greece and between Greece and and Israel, kind of in that area. There were Barbary pirates, and they were causing all kind of havoc with our ships, and so we went to war, and that's how that makes it into the song. So we went to war there in Tripoli. So there was a treaty that was eventually signed after this, and there's a statement in the treaty, but it's got a really strange history to it. I want to read the statement first, and then I want to tell you the really strange history behind it. So here's the statement. This is Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli. As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslimin, which is Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. So, this is like for atheists and for those who want to say, no, America's not a Christian religion, a Christian nation. This is the open and shut, the evidence for an open and shut case. It's got a really weird history to it. I'll come to that in a moment. But to be clear, when you're entering into a treaty with a Muslim nation and you say, we are not, as the words, founded on the Christian religion, you're talking to people whose entire nation is all wrapped up in the Muslim religion. They do have a state religion. You can't separate their sultan from their religion. All of that, they're under Sharia law. The law of the Quran is the law of the land. So all those things we talked about earlier that America is not and never has been, well, these Muslim nations are. And if you're writing to them to say, this is not who we are, you need to understand that we don't operate the way that you do. We are not founded on the Christian religion. That doesn't mean we're not founded on principles of Christianity or on the Christian worldview. It means that there is no official Christian religion that rules the United States of America. There's no state church. There is no, the priests, again, and the pastors are not the ones who are making the laws and making the judgments. That's all it means. Still, that's a really interesting history. So this version that I just read you, the English version, was passed and ratified by the Senate, signed by the President Thomas Jefferson. But it's a translation of the Arabic document, and that article is just not in the Arabic document. It's really interesting. It's almost as though it was added to the translation, and it's not something that the Muslims that we were making this agreement with ever saw. It's really interesting. So it has kind of an interesting history in its transmission and translation, and it's over that specific article. So, I mean, it's just not the open and shut case that most atheists want to make it out to be. Yeah. When you step back and understand the historical context, it makes perfect sense why they would want to say something like that.
Well, we've talked about some documents, but one trip to Washington, D.C. for me was just so overwhelmingly convincing, because you see monument after monument after monument and building after building after building that has preserved these ideas, and so many of them that they chose to put on these prominent buildings and in these prominent places included scripture and included words that were to or about God. And so as our nation has continued to grow and to continue to develop, we have chosen to memorialize and honor these parts of our founding. And so that to me also says so much.
And that's why, back to where we started, why is this even important? If we were founded on Christian principles, and if Christianity has a place in a biblical worldview, has a place in the public discussion and in public displays, then people are going to be asking questions in another 200 years. And they're going to look back at similar monuments and similar writings, and they're going to ask the same questions. And we want them to see the answer. Yes, absolutely. Christian principles, those are the guiding light that will take us to places of prosperity and liberty and human rights. That's the pathway that we need to follow.
Yeah.